Good evening. I'm continuing with the recording. This is part C of episode 1 of Do Ask Do Tell show, picking up when I got a note on the door at William and Mary. And I will go back to this image actually first and just point out something that I had. The ping pong table at the house was undersized, that I had friends over for a lot, and particularly Michael. And I don't know what happened to the table, but my father had made it back in the early 50s. It was undersized, so I won a lot of the games. But anyway, going back to the knock on the door, or the note on the door, not the knock on the door. When I got back to the dorm around 5 o'clock, it was a mild evening, foggy outside, and I was pretty sure it had been placed there that afternoon. I think I had been there a couple hours earlier. I just wanted to also add just one other little detail that I left out. Sydney had at one time told me that in 1960, the summer before his senior year when he was on camp, he had witnessed an assault on the camp and witnessed somebody being, as he quoted, ruined. So that might have also contributed to the attitude he had, and which has gotten out of control. But he even though Thanksgiving wasn't a holiday, he had not been there since Wednesday night, so I had the room to myself. And I saw this note on the door, and it referred to patent medicines being found in my room under recent room inspections. And I didn't even know they were having them, although Sydney had mentioned at one time, somebody had complained about my being messy or something. He had mentioned it once. But they had never really told us they did room inspections. But anyway, I walked over in the evening to the dean's office. Took about 5 minutes, and let's go back. Just stay on that. It turned out to be maybe the most consequential meeting I ever had in my life. I was 18. I went upstairs to the second floor, where his office was, sort of on the Richmond Road side of the building, and the room was kind of dark. There was just a green light there and everything, and I did discuss the room inspections, the hypochondria, the iodine and glycerin throat swab, and the Rolaids and the neosynephrine and everything. And he said, okay, but I had brought some with him and actually put them on the table and said, okay, he'll check it out. Then he started asking me about how I was getting along with the boys in the dorm. And I really didn't think there was any way out of saying what was going on. I could probably try to evade it, but he would probably just call me in again. And Sydney was out for the weekend, which I wondered if something was going on. So I told him then that I thought I was a latent homosexual, and that we talked about the word, it's pinning. My father would later say it's pinning a label on myself, and categorizing myself. It's like an identity in a sense. If you've had the arousal, even if you've not done anything, in a sense that you can kind of categorize yourself that way, and that's almost like something comparable to categorizing yourself by gender almost. And so, I don't like identitarianism either, people thinking they have to have genderized labels to go through life, and it's very dangerous. But I was falling for that then. And he said, well, he thanked me for my candor, and he said he wasn't going to ask me to leave school or anything, but we probably would have a talk with a therapist or something on campus. He wasn't, but then he asked me for where my parents were, and I gave him the phone. I told him that they were in Charlotte, and I gave him the name of the family, and I knew the address. I knew the street that they were on. I knew the name of the street, which is southeast of downtown. I won't repeat it here, and he did call him that night. Um, he did call him that night in Charlotte, just calling information and making paying for the call in a normal way that people did back in that time, long before we had cell phones and when making a long distance call was a big deal. And the family was near this obelisk in Charlotte. I still remember that. I took a picture when I was there once. And my parents, the call would have come about 8:15 or so in the evening, and my parents had gotten there, and they would have been having leftovers. The family had one daughter who was a year younger, or a year behind me, or maybe 2 years behind me. But they would have been sitting like watching television, watching the news. There was a lot of stuff going on about the Berlin Wall at the time and tensions in the Kennedy administration and so forth. This is 1961. The Bay of Pigs had happened. Remember, there was other stuff that had happened we didn't know about, but they might have been walking. And in the home, there was a back part of the house. There was a corridor linking the bedrooms, and there was a nightstand that you could see from the living room with a phone on it. And so Mr. Smith would have taken the call and would have probably called my father to the phone, and the dean would have introduced himself. He asked if my parents could come back and meet with him early next week, and they agreed to meet on Tuesday. My father wouldn't have known whether this was my getting a girl in trouble or violating the honor code, or possibly what they didn't want to think about it, homosexuality, because that would mean I'm an only child, and that would mean no lineage. And it's a little bit unusual with only sons. Usually it's not a firstborn son. So my case was a little bit unusual. And I don't know whether he told my mother during the weekend. I do know he says they stayed in Charlotte all weekend. They went to church Sunday, and I had loved the church there, the organ there. One time they played Fletcher cantata there or something. And I loved, they stayed because I loved the organ music there. And they came back Sunday, and Monday they called me, and in the dorm, somebody had to take the call, and then I had dinner with them Sunday night. We kind of talked about honesty and everything, but I didn't really tell them exactly what had happened. And we didn't really discuss what it was about, other than we didn't really have a confrontation or anything. I went back to the dorm room alone and studied the assignment for English, which was reading Eric Fromm's essay, The Art of Loving. Still remember that, laying on the bed and reading the lower bunk and reading it. And I was alone. The roommate was gone. And Tuesday morning I went to chemistry lecture as normal. I was supposed to get a test back in lab that afternoon. I probably had not done well, but the plan was for me to meet my parents outside of Rogers Hall, which was the science hall, which was near the Wren building. And my parents did meet the dean, and they met me. And my father asked me to go out and stand on Duke of Gloucester Street and wait for him to swing the car around, and they'd pick me up, and we'd go back to the dorm. So this is where he would have swung around. At that time, you could drive on the street, and I was standing on that corner. And that's another view of it, I think, watching a car coming around. And he said, well, Bill, this is going to come as a blow to you, but we have to take you out of school. And then we went back and met the dean on the second floor of Wren building right after lunch. And he said, well, if you get a psychiatrist to certify that it's okay to live in a dorm, you can come back next semester and we can figure out how to make up your courses. But that was probably pretty unlikely to work out. So I remember it was a cold day. It was the first cold day of the late fall. We went home, and I was settling into my new life, and my father took me to see a shrink on the following Thursday night in Washington. They got a psychiatrist as kind of an emergency to talk to me and to interview me, and then we assigned me someone to follow up and for me to see as a therapist regularly. I did start composing again, and one of the themes was the third sonata. Starts out something like that. And there was also some concern going on. I was starting to get back into my music when I was home, and the record player wasn't working, and I had gotten a copy of Bruckner's Ninth. And there's a passage in this, which at that time only had 3 movements. There's a passage in the scherzo which broke at the side, and the record player was gurgling. It was very distorted, and that passage turns out to be very critical to completing the symphony many decades later. So it's kind of an irony. And we'll come back to that in a later episode. But there's also the fact that he used the 7th Symphony theme in finishing it. Some completions use the 7th Symphony theme in completing it. So that was just something. But my parents agreed, to put me through school at home, and we met with the Dean Ruth, the Dean of Admissions. He just wanted to make sure I wasn't going to get a string of F's because there had been a psychiatric issue. They didn't mention the homosexuality, but this is GW, and that's the library building right there. And so I did enroll to start at GW the following February, and my parents did warn me that I must never mention homosexuality again to anyone. It was an unmentionable thing. And I think there's something you have to understand, that back in those days, for someone who was thought to be homosexual to be in a dorm of men, it was thought that interfered with the other men's ability to develop normally. They would be on guard as to whether somebody who was thought to be homosexual could be interested in them, or was judging them, or even had secret fantasies about them. Even if nothing happened, the very presence of something like that was thought to be harmful to other young men. Now we see that idea coming back with gays in the military 3 decades later, which a later episode will deal with. And then we actually see a variation of that with women and gender theory now. So, very important idea. And here's the Corcoran Hall, which is the chemistry building at GW. That's probably where I'll stop. That looks like that's a floor plan for NIH. And it looks like, and I would become a patient in NIH, and then the next sub-episode will take that up.